I'm Sanjay Sethi. I'm Director of the Clinical Research Office Core for the CTSI. The NIH has defined clinical research as patient-oriented research, which is conducted with human subjects in which there is an interaction with the human subjects. In addition to that, epidemiological and behavioral studies, outcomes research, and health services research also fall under the purview of clinical research. Within clinical research is a subgroup of clinical trials, and that's an area of special interest for the Clinical Research Office. The NIH defines clinical trials by a research studies in which one or more human subjects are prospectively assigned to an intervention, and then we look at certain outcomes based on the interventions. One of the questions we are often asked is, how is the Clinical Research Office different from the IRB or the Institutional Review Board? Well, the IRB is mainly concerned with human subject protection. So they're concerned about things like the consent forms, the risk-benefit ratio of research, conflict of interest, protected health information. They want to make sure that the investigator and the staff are adequately trained. And therefore, all clinical research has to go through the IRB. On the other hand, the Clinical Research Office is concerned with all the other aspects of clinical research which are important. These can be divided into concerns which are applied to the pre-award phase, the award phase, and the post-award phase. So many of these are business aspects of clinical research. For example, the Clinical Research Office represents and protects the university's interests in the form of agreements. They look at issues like feasibility, the budget, coverage analysis, regulatory issues, our affiliated institutions' interests, and also help with the study design. So these are all the pre-award activities where the Clinical Research Office is active in. Once the award comes in, the Clinical Research Office manages the use of a new clinical trial management system known as Encore. It helps with invoicing and accounting, and also, as necessary, it can provide coordinators and space, if required, for certain studies. And then following the study's end, the Clinical Research Office helps with the closure of the study and also with the disposition of residual funds. Another common concern or question is, how does the Clinical Research Office interact with sponsored program services? So here I'm trying to show how, depending on the source of funding, either the Clinical Research Office takes a primary role or the sponsored program services takes a primary role. So for federal funding, sponsored program services is the primary office that will work with you. On the other hand, with non-federal funding, the Clinical Research Office will be the primary office that you'll be working with. Non-federal funding can be either initiated by the sponsor, and these are many times multi-site studies that you may be asked to participate in, or it can be investigator-initiated, and many a time these are single-site studies, which are, again, initiated by the investigator and then looking for a non-federal sponsor. How will the Clinical Research Office, the IRB, and the sponsored program services work together to get your research going? Well, here is the proposed workflow. Once you have done your disclosure agreement, if necessary, and your feasibility analysis with the sponsor, you will be putting in a central study registration form. This form will then come to the Clinical Research Office, will allow the research office to facilitate a departmental or school level scientific review, and also will allow the central research office, the Clinical Research Office, to come back to you and say, these are the things you need for this study to get approved. So for example, do you need a coverage analysis? Do you need a budgetary review, et cetera? Those are the aspects then which will all be initiated once this central study registration happens. Once the scientific review is completed, you'll be submitting your study to the IRB. At that point, we have clinical research facilitators who will then make sure that your IRB submission is complete. Once the IRB has approved the study, at the same time, we are hoping is that all the other aspects to start the study are completed. For example, the coverage analysis, the budget, et cetera, and you get a final study approval. That study then gets put into the clinical trial management system, and you start implementing the study. The research office actually is mainly funded by the university with some support from the CTSI. We have, as you can see, we have associate operations directors, and then we have at least 2 individuals addressing each of the different functionalities of the research office. This is to make sure that things get done, as speedily as possible. I wanted to highlight some of the positions in the clinical research office that are supported by the CTSA specifically. One of them is a regulatory knowledge and support specialist, and that individual is there to provide you help with all aspects of regulatory matters, which including IRB submission, consent form development, INDs, IDEs, clinicaltrials.gov, and other similar issues. We also have two individuals who serve as research facilitators or navigators, and their job is to make sure that your IRB submissions are complete so that they have a better chance of making it through the first time. In addition, they're also there to help you to access the various services that are provided by the Clinical Research Office. So how do you access the services of the Clinical Research Office? If you go to the CTSA portal, you will see there's a tab for Clinical Research Navigators, and if you access the tab, you will see all the different services that are provided by the Research Office will be available to you, and you can request those. There are also circumstances where we will be reaching out to you where we think that the Clinical Research Office could be of benefit to your research. So in summary, the Clinical Research Office is trying to operationalize the major goals of the CTSA grant, which is to increase clinical and translational research at UB and its affiliated institutions.